In the wild, mysterious depths of Brittany, France, sits an old abandoned shack. Surrounded by ancient oaks and home to all manner of forest dwellers, it is here that we meet to share our stories. So pull up a seat, swing that light, grab your favourite beverage as we share another tantalising tale in the freaking shack.
Evening all.
Sounds like softly or something.
There you go, yeah. That's what I was going with.
It's an old police programme from many years ago.
Somebody will remember it. Somebody's on our wavelength.
Of course they are. Right.
We're doing weird and wonderful timey things.
We are. We sort of got into the travel bug, and then we started looking at travelling in different ways. We did the London Underground. Don't sing the song.
No. Not do I don't know what you mean. I wasn't thinking it at all.
If you haven't heard that one, go and have a listen.
It's well worth it.
Yeah. Right. So we decided that it wasn't just going to be normal travel.
No.
The more we looked into it, we decided that it was really interesting to look at time travel.
Yes, travelling within time or outside of time or I don't know, something.
So we started looking into time slips.
Because a lot of those are historical time slips, and they're sort of paranormal and weird and wonderful, but still on our travel theme, really.
Yeah.
Because a lot of these things happen when people are travelling, you know, and they're in a place that they don't normally spend time in. There's a lot of, you know where I'm going with this. I mean, people travel away and then these time slips kind of happen, but they don't realise they've happened until afterwards when they then go, oh, this place isn't there anymore, or...
Yeah, some people don't realise they've even time slipped until way after, which we found out in some of these stories, in actual fact. The interesting one was, I think we spoke about it quite a few episodes ago before Christmas, and we happened to mention the one about my husband, Steve, and his mum and dad coming home from holiday in a storm. So they were driving from Cornwall back up to London, Kent, through London into Kent, and they got caught up in this quite horrible, violent storm. And as they were going through the roads, because the motorways were either just beginning or not even around then, so it took a long time to drive from London, mainly on the A303, sort of going up from Cornwall. So there's no motorways in Cornwall anyway. There's a few dual carriageways now. But
no such thing as a motorway.
At that time, there was no dual carriageways. It was just literally two-way traffic. And they were either in Devon or Cornwall still, and looking for somewhere where they could just have something to eat. They were travelling through a small village, and for some reason they saw this lovely little, church hall with a sign outside saying hot food or something like that, and drinks or tea or tea. Anyway, they stopped and got out and went into the church hall, and they said it was brightly lit. There were women in there. Now, Steve remembers he was like a young teenager, and what he remembers is the fact that they had hot dogs, and there was other food available as well. But it was just full of women dressed like old-fashioned, like the Women's Institute type women. They'd made cakes and buns and all sorts of things. And he said that they were just so lovely and welcoming, and made them all this food and chatted to them, talked to them. And in the end, everybody left. They thanked them all very much for coming, and out they went to the car. Steve doesn't remember anyone else being in the building apart from these ladies and them. That's all. And he said they got back in the car and they drove home and honestly didn't think any more of it. And it wasn't until like times afterwards, every time they drove down to Cornwall after that, because they used to go back every year, every time they drove down, they would look for this place. Now, the main roads that you travelled on into Cornwall and through Devon were the same ones every time you travelled down. And they never found this place again, ever. And Steve's mum would always say, where on earth is that place that we stayed at? And they would look for it on the map and trying to find, and they never, ever found it again.
Well, it's funny you should say that, because... And where, because they were driving, you said they were driving down from Kent or around London.
No, they were driving from Cornwall to Kent.
There you go.
So,
well, it wouldn't have mattered even if they'd have made it, right? Let me tell you why. Because in the 1980s, a couple driving through Kent in the UK found themselves lost in dense fog.
Ooh.
Not in fenced dog, which is what I read the first time when I read this. I was like, why they were lost in a fenced dog? No, dense fog. Oh dear, dyslexia is a beach. Anywho, they stumbled upon a picturesque old cottage named Hope House and decided to ask for directions. An elderly woman dressed in old-fashioned clothes welcomed them, gave them directions. When they tried to revisit the cottage a few days later, they found nothing but an empty field where Hope Cottage once stood.
Oh.
Hope House, sorry.
Hope House.
Hope House.
Yeah.
Once stood. Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
How bizarre.
Yeah.
So it's not just them.
No. Oh no. This
is a thing.
This is a real thing. I started off by looking at this. The tale of what they call the disappearing village is a mysterious and eerie one. It's often shared among seasoned travellers and folklore enthusiasts. In the story, the disappearing village is located in a remote area. Travellers usually stumble upon it by accident and are often lost or looking for a shortcut or sheltering from bad weather. The place is often idyllic, quaint, and seems to be from another era. The locals are usually welcoming, albeit a bit peculiar, with old-fashioned attire and manners.
Well, they've actually just found Cornwall.
It's just the Cornish, yeah. And it says here that after enjoying the hospitality, the traveller may choose to stay overnight. The evening is filled with warmth and cheer, with villagers sharing stories by the fire.
Swing that light.
Yeah. Offering delicious home-cooked meals and even inviting travellers to participate in traditional, turn the page,
traditional something,
festivals, music and dance.
Love it.
The atmosphere is almost too perfect, almost dreamlike. What were you thinking? Why are you laughing?
I am laughing, and if my brother ever watches this, listens to this, if Luke ever listens to this, he would find that funny too. And the reason that he would find that funny is because you said turn the page, right?
Yeah.
Because we recorded one of those stories, you know, where you try and, when you're kids and you've got a cassette player and you're trying to record something, right? And we were trying to record this like audio book, right? Where we're reading this story. And you remember the old ones that used to say, when you hear this sound, turn the page, right?
Okay, yeah.
And I tried to say that on the recording, but I started too low, right? So when I said it, I said, when you hear this sound, turn the page. And that's all I can hear is my brother reiterating that sentence to me with a really low page. Turn the page. So every time somebody says turn the page, that's what I hear in my head.
That's what you hear in your head.
It's him saying turn the page. Sorry, that was a bit of a tangent there. But did anybody ever do that? Did anyone else do that? Is it just me? Where you actually tried to record like a radio station or not record the radio station, but I mean like
But you and Luke used to do that a lot.
Yeah, we did.
You and Luke used to do adverts.
Yep.
You used to do reading the news.
Yeah.
The two of you. We used to video you.
Well, we had our own like makeshift radio program. You know, where we had quiz shows and everything.
That's it. Yeah, you do quizzes and your own adverts and your own news programs.
It was fun.
It was fun.
It was very silly, and I wish I still had them because it would be very amusing.
Dad must have some video recording of you and Luke together,
probably
doing that.
Probably
in the caravan when we first went away together.
Oh yeah, that was when we did all the adverts.
Yeah, so maybe we'll have to try and hunt them down and find them.
Yeah, we're not putting those on social media.
We might find little clips.
Might find a clip.
Yeah, we'll see. Anyway, going back to these travellers, the following morning, if they've stayed overnight, the traveller leaves the village, often with plans and promises to return and to tell others about the hidden gem that they've discovered, only to find that when they retrace their steps, the village is nowhere to be found. Where once there were quaint cottages and church halls, there is now only dense forests or open fields.
There you go.
According to local legends, the village has been appearing and disappearing for centuries. Some say it is cursed, others believe it is enchanted, existing in a parallel universe or dimension, or it is caught in a time loop. The villagers themselves may be spirits of those who once lived there, forever trapped in time, or perhaps they possess a secret known only to their own kind.
I love that.
I know.
And it's interesting because like we see like there's loads of stories about a phantom thing or a thing that comes and goes, whether it's a person or a vehicle or whatever it is. But a whole village is another ballgame, isn't it?
It is, yeah. It says in recent times, a few lucky travellers have shared similar experiences, though sceptics often dismiss them as hallucinations or elaborate hoaxes. Yet those who have experienced it swear by its truth, recalling vivid details and the uncanny feeling of having stepped back in time. I thought you were going to sing a song then.
I wasn't, no.
I looked at her and she looked at me and I thought she was going to sing...
There was a look.
The Back in Time song.
No, I wasn't. I can't actually think of one.
I've got here, has anyone ever experienced anything like this? Obviously my husband has, because that seems to be what may have happened to them on this holiday as they were travelling home. Time slips are fascinating phenomena reported by people who claim to have briefly experienced a different time period, either into the past or even into the future.
Ooh.
These stories can be fascinating but puzzling. We're going to go on to look at some examples. But of course, we are fascinated by time. And one of the things, of course, is all the films and the programmes on TV. So we've got like Back to the Future, Doctor Who, who's a time, what's he called? A Time Lord. He is a Time Lord. And then you've got the popular Outlander series.
Yes, I was going to say
where she goes through the stones. You've got Harry Potter with Hermione with a time turner.
Yep.
And fascinating stories that come from the Potter universe.
I think to be fair, the whole thing with time and the reason that we're kind of obsessed with it, with the film and books and
I
things
think
like that.
There's another book, isn't there? The Time Traveller's Wife.
The Time Traveller's Wife. Oh, it's heartbreaking.
I know.
Anyway, I think there's a reason why we're so obsessed with it, because it is something that is just outside of our ability to change. So the fact that something as constant and consistent as time, as often, I'd love to say it's consistent, but the time always passes slower when you're not enjoying yourself, doesn't it? But it is that whole thing of something that we can't control. We have no power over it at all. So it makes sense that it would be something that would be...
Yeah. And how many times do we say, oh, if I could just go back in time.
Yeah.
If I could just go back 5 minutes. Or we beat ourselves up sometimes because something has happened. And it's just like, oh, if I'd have just done something, if I could just go back.
Yep.
And just do it again. Or if I could... How many times, as again, people said, if you could just go back and spend...
Hindsight's a wonderful thing.
Yeah, one day in the past, who would you spend your day with? And to go back and just... I can remember doing I was doing a hypnotherapy course. And as part of that hypnotherapy course, we were all hypnotising each other. And we were being hypnotised by the person who was running the course. We were then practicing on the people that we were working with. And one of the hypnotic trances that I went into was going back in time. And I can remember going back to my childhood and actually spending 5 minutes. It felt like a whole day, but it was probably no longer than 5 minutes. But I spent that time back playing in my garden as like maybe an 8 or 9 year old.
Wow. Playing
with my brother and sister in our playhouse. And I just burst into tears when I when I was brought out. But through sheer happiness, I honestly felt as though I had time travelled.
Wow.
It was that powerful. Fascinating. But I've got here, time, or the concept of time, is an area of fascination. It moulds our lives and dictates our actions and feelings. Film and TV shows show just how intrigued we are by the possibility of messing or manipulating time. We have as yet been unable to influence or change or slow down time in our everyday lives. It ticks on regardless. Doctor Who describes time, though, as a big ball of wibbly wobbly timey-wimey stuff.
I like it. That works for me.
It works, doesn't it? But that was his explanation of what time is. And as he's the Time Lord,
who's to argue?
Who's going to argue with him? But I now have a story about time.
Swing that light.
Absolutely. It's called the Versailles Time Slip. In 1901, 2 English women, Charlotte Ann Moberly and Eleanor Jourdain, visited the Palace of Versailles. While exploring the gardens, they claimed they got themselves lost. Looking again further into this, I realised, turn the page.
Turn the page.
I realised that they were obviously following some of the other people through the place, and they took a side turning that they shouldn't have taken and ended up lost. They couldn't find their way. It says both women noticed a change in the atmosphere where they were suddenly once they both realised they were lost. They did not speak to each other at this point. They just both realised, they found out afterwards, they both suddenly realised that something didn't seem right. Everything suddenly looked unnatural and therefore slightly unpleasant. It was said that they said even the trees seemed to become flat and lifeless, like wood worked in tapestry. There were no effects of light and shade, and no wind stirred the trees. They actually met people on their way as they walked. They were approached by men dressed in very sort of almost like royal clothes, very ornate clothes, not from their time at all. I mean, we're going back to 1901 now, but even the clothes that they saw these men in, they were not the clothes that they would normally see. They also saw somebody who they believed had had smallpox because of the scars on his face. And they also saw a lady dressed in extremely beautiful dress, painting a picture, who they since believed to be Marie Antoinette.
Oh, wow.
So they returned to the palace, and suddenly they were back with a group of other visitors. They didn't mention it to each other until later. And what they reported was seeing people in historic attire, witnessing everyday activities of that era. The experience lasted only a few minutes until they found themselves back in their own time with these visitors. As I said, they didn't mention it to each other until later, when they both wrote their own accounts separately and then compared the stories. They eventually concluded that they must have witnessed events from August 1792.
Wow.
And it was just weeks before the French monarchy was abolished.
Ooh.
Because of the people that they believed they saw. Very interesting. So that was an interesting one to come across. It says time slips are not new. They have been reported throughout history, and many different cultures seem to experience them. So it's not just Western cultures. Cultures from all across the world witness these like time slips. And it has puzzled scientists, philosophers, and paranormal enthusiasts alike.
It certainly intrigues me.
It does. It really intrigues me. Have you got another story?
Yes.
Shall I say that again? Have you got another story?
Yes, I do. I do. I have the story of the Liverpool time slip.
Oh.
Yeah. This one is much more recent. I say much more recent. Showing my age now, I think. But this one is from the 1990s. This one's from the 1990s. A man named Frank was shopping in Liverpool when he stepped into Bold Street. I nearly said Bond Street. He stepped into Bold Street. He suddenly found himself in the 1950s. Can't help but think he made a wrong turn. The modern shops had turned into their historical counterparts, and the people around him were all dressed in vintage clothing. He even saw an old-fashioned van pass by. Moments later, everything returned to normal, leaving him completely bewildered.
Wow. Yeah.
I think, yeah.
It makes me wonder sometimes if a previous story that we told of Luke and Dad driving into Truro, where they saw that chap on the bike, in very old-fashioned clothes, riding on the road, which would have been a track at one time leading into the city, and he was travelling along, and they moved the car out to go around the bend, and when they got round the bend, there was nobody there. The bike had gone, the man had gone. And
it does make you wonder if that's some kind of a
time slip.
Time slip.
Yeah.
And in fact, any paranormal event like that could be some kind of crossover between two.
Yeah. Yeah.
Essentially, that's what it is, isn't it?
It's almost the present catching up with the past, or the past catching up with the present. Really interesting. This one is interesting. It was autumn in 1957 when 3 trainee soldiers walked through the village of Kersay in Suffolk in the UK. They suddenly began to notice things around them changing. The trees appeared to change colour from the autumn colours that it should have been to suddenly spring. So suddenly the trees were, that was that lovely bright green that you see in the springtime. The church bells that had been ringing suddenly stopped. And looking around, they realised that the church was no longer there.
How weird.
There were no people, no street lights or telephone wires. There were small cottages, but no sign of life. Turn the page. Turn the page. I'm only doing it because you'll probably hear me turn the page. Turn the page. They ventured inside, eventually, what looked like a butcher's shop. Inside, they found 3 skinned oxen hanging from the ceiling.
As you do.
But strangely, they said, everything was covered in cobwebs. And there was an eerie feeling in the shop that surrounded them, and they felt like they were being watched, and that someone or something didn't want them there.
Ooh. Probably the oxen, to be fair.
Probably. But this strange experience lasted, they said, for about 30 minutes.
Wow.
As they wandered around this village, wondering where on earth they were now, because suddenly all the telephone wires had all gone. And
to go from like hearing church bells to suddenly no church bells, and not just that, but no church.
Yeah.
Weird.
Yeah. After about 30 minutes, they heard the church bells again. And suddenly smoke was rising from the chimneys of the cottages.
You said chimneys.
The church, they found out, was actually built in the 12th century. So if this was a so-called time slip, it must have taken them back to sometime in the 1100s.
Wow. Wow.
Wow, yeah. Wow, indeed.
That's crazy. You would...
And the fact
that would
that
get you thinking, wouldn't it?
Yeah, and the fact that there was 3 of them.
Yeah, this wasn't just like one person having a moment.
Yeah. Anyway, on we go. I have another. It was June 1968, and Mrs. Charlotte Warburton and her husband were shopping in the town of Tunbridge Wells in the UK.
Pretty place.
Mrs. Warburton was looking for a brand of her favourite coffee. Her usual grocer's shop didn't have any. So her and her husband split up, and she decided to go into the local supermarket. As she walked through the doors, she noticed an entrance to a cafe that she'd never seen before. It looked old-fashioned with wooden panelled walls, and the light inside was dim from frosted light bulbs and no natural light. The women were wearing dresses and the men in long dresses, and the men were all in suits. At first, Mrs. Warburton didn't consider anything abnormal and just thought she'd never noticed it before. She left and continued her shopping elsewhere, and then met up again with her husband. Turn the page. It's going to be a thing. The next time the 2 of them went shopping, Mrs. Warburton suggested trying the cafe that she'd seen as somewhere new to try. Only on entering the shop, there was no such cafe, and the staff in the supermarket explained that there never had been a cafe there, and maybe she was mistaken. On further investigation, this was obviously a woman, a savvy woman who thought there was more to look into here. They actually found out from local historians that the premises used to have an assembly rooms and a small bar area with tables. Mrs. Warburton's description of what she thought was a cafe fitted the description of a... Now, I'm not sure I'm going to get this saying right, I don't know, but it was a description of a long gone bar area of the old Cosmos, and I believe it's Kinema. It's not cinema, it started with a K. I spoke to Dad and he said something about it being like a German name.
Oh, okay.
So I don't know. But it was the Cosmos Kinema, and there is actually a picture of this on the internet.
No way.
And it was like a theatre come cinema. How long ago, I don't know, but it was obviously a very big building, which is why they obviously used it for the supermarket now.
Yeah.
But at one time it had been, and this is what they say, it was a long gone bar area of the old Cosmos Kinema. There you go.
I have a very important question.
Yes.
Did she then go on to make really nice bread?
I think she did. I thought that when I saw her name. Warburton's is a good bread.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Sorry.
You're going to do yours.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to do mine, but mine's my last one, so you're going to do yours.
Well, I'm going to do this one.
Okay.
Because this one, mine are all really tiny. They're just
they are
little snippets.
Snippets, yeah.
A wee snippet. So this one is called the Phantom Airfield.
Ooh.
Which I thought was quite weird. But in 1935, RAF pilot Sir Victor Goddard claimed to have experienced a time slip while flying over an abandoned airfield in Scotland. As he approached the airfield, he saw it fully operational, with mechanics in blue uniforms and yellow planes parked on the tarmac. When he revisited the airfield 4 years later, he discovered that it had been repainted and brought back into service, just as it had been redone, just as he'd seen it during the time slip. So they brought it...
So he'd gone into the future, a future time slip.
Potentially, but it does say that it was abandoned.
It had been abandoned.
It had... Yeah, I'm not sure. Because it says he claimed to have experienced a time slip when flying over an abandoned airfield in Scotland. As he had approached the airfield, he saw it fully operational with mechanics in blue uniforms and yellow planes parked on the tarmac. When he revisited the airfield 4 years later, he discovered that it had been repainted and brought back into service, just as he had seen during his time slip. So, yeah, he went forwards.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is what some of them were saying. It's not always backwards.
Yeah.
You can have these time slips where you get a glimpse of something in the future.
Ooh. There's a couple of authors that I am absolutely convinced must have time travelled, because they're, reading these books that they wrote way back.
Yeah.
And they're getting things like, I read about a guy who was talking on a mobile phone device, a mobile device, and he was talking to somebody, and it wasn't just that he was talking to somebody on a mobile phone, but he lost the signal when he went through a tunnel.
Oh.
And it was like, wait a minute, you wrote this like back in the 30s. How would you have... I mean, obviously there were still signals and radio and yeah. I don't know. Anyway, it was like it could have been written yesterday. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah, I do.
So I'm convinced that some of these people must have had some kind of inside info.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Anyway, carry on. Or do you want me to do another one?
No, you do another one, and then I'll finish with this one, I think.
Hang on a minute, because I've only got one left.
Okay.
This one is the Spanish soldiers.
Oh.
So during the Spanish Civil War in the 1930s, several soldiers reported witnessing a battle scene from a much earlier period. They saw knights in armour engaged in combat with archaic weapons and horse-drawn carriages. The soldiers were left stunned by the vividness of this historical scene.
It just goes to prove we have learned nothing.
Yeah. No. Yeah. Because you just did another battle.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well done. Well, yeah. Let's.
But how weird. But that's what I was saying to you about when I caught a glimpse of that story when I passed it over to you, was the fact that Dad, my husband, when he was a boy, he lived along the marshes near the Thames. And there were quite often sightings. Now, whether this was a time slip or not, or whether it was a manifestation of spirits who had walked the land before, I don't know how to explain that. But quite often there were Roman soldiers seen walking like on the marshes at the back of their gardens.
Wow.
And the adults wouldn't say too much in front of the children because they didn't want to scare the children. But quite often that these Roman soldiers were seen there.
Did you wave?
I have no idea.
I just wanted to wave at them.
Yeah. Hi.
Yeah. There's a guy when I do the bus route in the morning with the kids.
Yeah.
There's one guy in a house and he waves every day. Every day.
We used to, when we went to school, I went to school in Newquay, and we used to catch the bus from Perranporth to Newquay in Cornwall. And as we got into Newquay, we would go past the boating lake, and then we would go under the big bridges, the big
viaduct.
The viaduct. And as we went under the viaduct, on the left-hand side was a house set up on the road. From the road, and there was always a lady in that window waving to us every morning, and the whole bus, all the students on the bus would wave to her, and she was there every single morning until one day she wasn't. Oh, and we were just like, oh. And then I think we found out, one of the girls locally found out that she'd passed away, but we always continued to wave. We always waved at the house.
I think you'd have to, wouldn't you?
Yeah, just in case she was still there. Yeah, we still waved, and we were. Yeah.
Well, you never know. She might be still waving.
Yeah,
just on a different plane.
Yeah, absolutely. Right, my final time slip story. And I don't think it will be our final time that we look at these, because I am fascinated by these stories. I need to know if anybody out there has ever had a time slip or knows of anybody who may have had an experience similar to this.
There's got to be some of our listeners going, oh, I remember when so-and-so told me about this. Come and tell us.
Please, yeah.
Drop by our socials. Come and tell us. We'd love to either share your story
We want some more personal stories from people that we can share. I mean, we share ours. Yeah. I share the ones that happen
Would you share yours?
I share mine. Yeah. You haven't got any.
I haven't got any. I'll just sit here in my box. It's fine.
Anyway, this one I liked because it was close to home, as in Cornwall home, but not quite Cornwall. Still on the Devon side. In the 1980s, so we're a bit closer to now, a young woman called Caroline moved to Devon so that she could begin her new job with the NHS. That's our health service, by the way, our National Health Service. One weekend, a friend drove them to Plymouth to go to a party. And during the drive, Caroline remembers seeing a stunning church. It was close to their destination. She remembers that the windows were full of colour from the light that was streaming through the stained glass. As they passed by the front doors that were open, so the front doors were open, she was able to look into the church and see the beautiful sunlight coming through this massive stained glass window from the other side of the church. And the church was full of people, this huge congregation. A few weeks later, Caroline was passing the same place with her boyfriend, and she suddenly cried out in horror when she saw the same church, because it was in complete ruins.
Was it the bombed out church?
Her boyfriend explained that the church was called Charles Church, and it had been bombed during World War II, and the ruins had been left as a memorial. But in the 1980s, she had seen that church fully as it had been.
When you said where it was, and I was like, oh, I bet I know which church it was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I thought that was a good one to finish on.
Absolutely. Oh, how cool would it be, though? Because, you know, like when there's ruins and things of buildings, and there's always that. I mean, it's slightly different when, you know, when they're more recent buildings. But when you see very old buildings,
yeah,
and they are ruins because of time, it's always a thing for me where it's like, I'd love to know what they looked like before.
Yeah.
So, like, you've got the ruins of, you know, little cottages, stroke barns, stroke
we have
things.
Yeah.
And it's like, but what was it before? What did it look like?
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? How long ago was that?
Yeah.
And what did it look like?
We know that in our little hamlet here, there were 57 people living here.
Wow.
In this hamlet. And the houses are tiny.
Yeah.
I mean, our house isn't particularly tiny because we didn't. It was like it when we bought it. But it's been...
well, I mean, this place was probably a cowshed or something in the beginning, wasn't it?
Well, no, this was the house.
Oh, was it?
This was the house because it's got the fire in the kitchen.
Ah, yes.
So that was...
this is the farmhouse.
This is the farmhouse bit.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Mine was a cowshed.
Yeah.
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 I've got a
But
lounge
next door, which is now our lounge and also the mezzanine area, that was the cowshed.
Gotcha.
But of course they've gone through the wall. The wall is about 4 foot thick.
Oh, it's probably more than that.
Where the step is that goes up into what was the barn. Yeah,
it's probably a bit more than 4 foot. Even.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's huge. So they've gone through that wall, which is where the chimney is. Although we've still got the chimney there to use. But so we've got that room as our lounge now. So it makes the whole house bigger than it particularly was to start with. But 57 people lived up here, and we've got ruins which are up on our other bit of land. Where we've got a house. There is an old...
there must have been a house.
We talked about it before, haven't we?
Yeah, there's a footprint we can build.
Yeah, we can actually build on the footprint of that bit of land because it is earmarked for... It's not farmland.
No.
It is actually constructible land if we wanted it to be. So, yes, it's very interesting.
We might expand the shack.
Yeah, we could. But there's also another house which was opposite. We've got a little place that we call our village.
Yeah, the little
where the barn and the little outhouses are, and up there opposite the entrance there is another house.
Yeah, there's another ruin there.
There's another ruin that belongs to the farmer, and that I'm assuming was a house as well. But a lot of our buildings are like where the animals were when we first found one of the barns, and we knew it was there, but we actually managed to get into it and clear it a little bit. And the farmer came up that was living then. He's not anymore now, but he came up and he looked all round and was explaining to us this is where the cows lived. So he was able to give us a little bit of history. But yeah. It's
kind of cool sometimes to go online and have a look at, places that, aren't quite like they used to be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Lots of walks that we've done around here as well. And quite often we'll suddenly you'll turn a corner or you'll come out of a footpath and all of a sudden you're on a little tiny country back road and suddenly there's like 7 or 8 houses that are all in different states of ruin, but they were obviously once all a little commune, a little hamlet of bustling people who were obviously, farming and doing stuff like that. And you can almost sit and feel the atmosphere of what it might have been like.
Yeah.
And it's a bit like that up here sometimes. But not that we've ever had anything spooky or ghostly happen up here. And I think even if I was to meet the farmer, if he was out walking one night when I take the dog out, he would just go, welcome.
Welcome. I was just about to say that. Welcome. Bless him.
Dear of him. He was so lovely.
It was one of the only English words he knew.
Yeah, it was.
It?
Yeah. But anyway, so what are time slips? Are they real? Or do they belong in a fictional sci-fi book and not reality? If so, how do we explain the hundreds of accounts that are reported? Is it this glitch in the Matrix? Or is it down to unique energies in certain places dependent on the Earth's magnetic fields? They do say that there's some sort of special like ley lines and things like that sort of around places like Stonehenge and stuff like that where energies sort of converge, yes. So is it down to those types of energies in the Earth?
In short, I ain't got a clue.
No, we haven't. I'm throwing this out here for discussion.
Great.
Because I have no answers.
I was going to say we need a bit more extra input for that then.
We do.
I am a mushroom.
Anybody who is an expert in ley lines, energies of the Earth,
any of the above.
Yeah, magicians.
Any or all of the above.
Time travellers.
Yep. I don't know. In short.
Or anybody who's got a fascinating story to tell of any sort of paranormal, strange experience, we will be very welcome to have you come and tell your story or write your story and let us tell it.
Yeah.
Even anonymously, if you want to be anonymous.
Absolutely. But we're also happy if you've got a social media account or something and we can tell your story and tag you in it or have you on as a guest. Absolutely. Yeah, I think it would be great to do some chatting with some other people, getting some other people's experiences,
some collaborative work.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Anyway, that is about it. I'm going to time slip downstairs and have something to eat.
I think that's a wise move. And possibly some more wine.
Quite possibly.
We will time sip.
Time sip. I like it. Wine slip.
Wine sip.
Wine sip. Yeah.
Time slip. Wine sip. Oh,
yeah.
That's just too difficult after a glass of wine. Anyway.
Anywho's.
Keep your minds open and your lamps lit, lovely people.
And we will see you back here next week at
the Freaking Shack.
Bye.
Find us on all our social medias. Email fshack03@gmail.com. TikTok @the.freaking.shack. Instagram @the_freaking_shack. And Facebook is the-freaking-shack. All those freakings are without a G. And our little web page is at fshack03.podbean.com. We look forward to hearing from you.